What's up, guys? I'm your host, the J-Man. Welcome to my video, and this is a follow-up to my previous video about the X-Men. Alright, in my previous video I was breaking down the different categories of X-Men stories. Okay, you have all types of different stories for X-Men books. For instance, you have stories that involve Apocalypse, stories that involve Mojo World, stories that involve the Savage Land. Alright, you have all that. So X-Men, what I was trying to say is that X-Men is a very expansive theme or idea. A whole lot of different elements play into that. You also have the category of stories that are about segregation, prejudice against mutants. Those stories usually involve things like the Sentinels, and even sometimes Magneto plays a part in that because he's very political. He feels that mutants are superior to humans. So you have those types of stories too, and what other types? There's so many different types of stories that X-Men revolve around. Also, there's the whole concept of the Morlocks. The Morlocks that are these ugly, deformed creatures that live underground. They live in tunnels, like in sewers. And they're also mutants, but they're categorized as Morlocks because they're like less developed, I guess, than the X-Men mutants. So those are another type of stories. Like, these stories, very seldom do they cross paths. From my observances, it's usually very distinct. Whether it's a story about the Morlocks, then it's not a story about time travel. It's a story about Mojo World, then it's not a story about the Savage Land. I mean, obviously you can have more than one setting and more than one group of people in one story, but that very rarely ever merges into one story, just from my observances. Okay? And in a way, that's kind of a good thing, because X-Men, like I said, is so expansive, it would be very easy to get confused. Alright? So, I want to talk about my favorite types. I really, truly like stories that involve Apocalypse, because I think he's just so epic, and there's so much mystery and mysticism involved with his character. Like, can the X-Men ever really defeat him? Will they ever really kill him off, or is he truly immortal? Where does he get his powers from? What exactly motivates him? There's been all kinds of stories written about Apocalypse. His origin has been fleshed out. That you can read about it online. He basically came from Egypt, and somehow he was able to prolong his lifespan due to the fact that he's a mutant. Okay, but I really like those stories that involve Apocalypse, because Apocalypse usually has a grand scheme that encompasses the entire world, the entire universe. And Apocalypse is all about survival of the fittest. He's all about, like, let the strong eradicate the weak, and the strong shall inherit the earth, and that type of thing. So it usually involves war concepts, and then you have, like, one group of mutants or one group of characters fighting another group, which is really exciting for me to watch or read about. So I tend to lean towards those types. But X-Men has a whole lot to do with science fiction as a whole. Just the idea that the human body can evolve and develop these powers, that in itself is scientific based, or science fiction based. So if you tend to like sci-fi stories, then X-Men is going to be right up your alley. But then again, if you don't, maybe you prefer something more like what should I say? It's hard to really identify a Marvel title that isn't sci-fi related, because Iron Man is very sci-fi related, Spider-Man is very sci-fi related. It's really hard to say, but X-Men is definitely sci-fi related. And But okay, I want to talk about some of my favorite characters from the X-Men. Some of my favorite X-Men and why they're my favorites. My favorites are, I'm going to say right now, Wolverine. Obviously, probably my number one favorite. It's got to be my number one favorite. Magneto, even though he's a villain. We're primarily talking about the good guys here. I'm not going to talk about my favorite villain right now, but you could probably guess it would be Apocalypse. But anyway, Wolverine, Magneto. I also really like Colossus, believe it or not. I think Colossus is a very interesting character. And surprisingly, Cyclops I'm not a big fan of Cyclops. And even though there's so much involvement with Cyclops, Cyclops is pretty much the key character in X-Men. Him and Professor X. And Jean, too. But one more thing I forgot to mention. Any story involving Phoenix, which there have been many, many stories, those stories are all geared towards space exploration and space travel and things like that, outer space, because it involves the Shi'ar Empire. And basically, the Phoenix is this primal entity, this force of nature that exists in outer space. And so that's another category of stories that we have. I forgot to mention those. But those are very prevalent. So like I said, X-Men really breaks down into many different categories. And it just depends on what you like, man. I mean, you can find pretty much anything. If you really like adventure, maybe you like adventure on Earth rather than adventure out in outer space. So then you can read stories about the Savage Land. But there's all kinds of stuff like that. X-Men has something for everybody. There's characters young and old. You can definitely relate to it. I think X-Men is more about relationships than Iron Man or, let's say, Spider-Man, which is just usually a focus on one character, and he might have a relationship with one other person. But with the X-Men, their relationships all intertwine. So it's very, very interesting. Alright, so that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Please, if you have any comments, write them down below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching my video, and I'll see you next time.